הוא יפתח ליבנו בתורתו, הוא יפתח ליבנו בתורתו, הוא יפתח ליבנו בתורתו, הוא יפתח ליבנו בתורתו, וישם בליבנו אהבתו, ויראתו לעשות רצונו. וישם בליבנו אהבתו, ויראתו לעשות רצונו, הוא יפתח ליבנו בתורתו, הוא יפתח ליבנו בתורתו, הוא יפתח ליבנו בתורתו, הוא יפתח ליבנו בתורתו, וישם בליבנו אהבתו, ויראתו לעשות רצונו. וישם בליבנו אהבתו, ויראתו לעשות רצונו, יאללה, 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 Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Hu yiftach libeinu betorato. Hu yiftach libeinu betorato. Hu yiftach libeinu betorato. Hu yiftach libeinu betorato. May God open our heart with God's Torah and put into our heart God's love, God's fear, in order to do God's will. So I like the love part. The love is good. I mean, we like that God should put in our hearts ahavato, the love of God. We like it when we say, V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol modecha. Loving God with all of our heart and soul and substance. We like it when we say, V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, you shall love your fellow person as yourself. We would like God to open our hearts to the Torah, so the Torah can put into our hearts love of God and fear of God, in order that we might be able to do God's will. And that's a nice thing to say on Shavuot, the love part. Most translations for Yirato translate it as awe. I don't think it means awe. I think the plain sense of the text is fear. The prayer comes from Uvalet Zion Goel, which we say at the end of the weekday Shacharit service at the Kedusha Desidna section. And we like to be commanded to love God with everything. Those of us whose Judaism revolves around tikkun olam, or spirituality, or community, we want a God of love. We're kind of put off with J.D. Salinger, who said, if I were God, I would certainly not want people to love me sentimentally because it's too unreliable. We live in a world where our daily actions and daily decisions take place in a drama of love and fear. I mean, look at our politics, where they are at this age. The Torah is a very nice book of love, the Torah that we celebrate on this second day of Shavuot. It includes verses that establish the Torah reading for Shavuot, verses that we just heard read from the Torah. You shall count off 7 weeks. Start to count the 7 weeks when the sickle is first put to the standing grain. Then you shall observe the Feast of Weeks for Adonai your God, offering your free will contribution according to Adonai, as Adonai your God has blessed you. You shall rejoice before Adonai your God with your son, your daughter, your male and female slave, the Levite in your communities, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow in your midst, at the place where Adonai your God will choose to establish God's name. Bear in mind that you were slaves in Egypt. Oh, yes. And take care to obey these laws. Shiva Shavuot tispo lach, ve'achel charmesh b'kama, tachel lispo Shiva Shavuot. ועשית חג שבועות לאדוני אלוהיך, מצד נדבת ידך, אשר תיתן, כאשר יברכך אדוני אלוהיך. ושמחת לפני אדוני אלוהיך, אתה ובנך וביתך ועבדך ואמתך והלוי אשר בשעריך והגר והיתום והאלמנה אשר בקרבך, במקום אשר יבחר אדוני אלוהיך לשכן שמו שם. זכרת כי עבד היית במצרים, שמרת לעשות את החוקים האלה. Interesting, they give no date for the holiday. It's when the sickle is put to the standing grain. And that probably was because in ancient times, that was at different months. In the north, it came later. In the southern kingdom of Yehuda, it came earlier. That's when it was celebrated. And what we're celebrating is what we might call gifts of nature, the harvest of the winter crops of wheat and barley, the newborn lambs and kids, wool harvest, time of plenty, thank God. And thank God we must. You shall rejoice before Adonai your God. We don't do a whole lot of winter harvesting here in Minnesota, but even those sheltering in can enjoy the beauty of the new life all around us. So we decorate our shul with boughs of flowers, usually, sing psalms of Hallel, read the astonishing joy of the season in the Torah. When our older brothers and sisters went up to Jerusalem, each with a tenna of bikurim of the first harvest, gifts to the Bet HaMikdash to thank God for the world we were given. The Torah reading is all about joy and celebration and recognizing the abundant blessing from God and experiencing in the most immediate way God's love. It is out of love that we do God's will. Me'avato la'asot ritzono. And then we read, just a few minutes later, before God, pestilence goes and plague comes forth at God's feet. We think, it's Shabbat, it's Shavuot. What do we need pestilence for now? I didn't log into this service to hear about plagues. Get the God of love back now. I thought we had a nice religion. I want my money back. So before God, according to the Haftarah, goes Dever, the pestilence, and Reshef, the plague, comes forth at God's feet. God halts. God makes the earth rock, looks and makes nations leap, and the age-old mountains crumble, and ancient hills collapse. The ancient marches are God's. The tents of Cushan are shattered, shaken the tent curtains of Midian's land. With Neharim, rivers, is Adonai incensed. Against Neharim, your wrath, against Yam, the sea, your fury, when you ride your horses, your chariots to victory. Laid bare is your bow and the 7 rods of Emah. Selah. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains see you, shudder. A stream of water surges. The deep sends forth its voice. The sky swears solemnly. Shemesh, the sun, and Yereach, the moon, stand still at the zenith by the light of your arrows. They go by the radiance of the gleam of your spear. In wrath you stride across the earth. In fury you trample nations. All of this in the Haftarah, all of this begins with the words, Adonai shemati shemacha. Yareti Adonai pa'olcha bekerev shanim chayehu, bekerev shanim todia, berogez rachim tizkor. Adonai, I have heard the report of you, am in awe. Adonai, of your acts. In these very years, revive them. In these very years, make them known. In anger, remember to show mercy. It's not awe. I'm terrified. It's in a state of panic. The prophet Habakkuk wrote 2 very nice, interesting chapters, and someone decided to add a psalm at the end of Habakkuk's very short book. And someone else decided it would be great to read it on Shavuot and ruin the whole day. And here we meet a gang of dangerous characters. Dever, the pestilence. Reshef, the plague. Nahar, the river. Yam, the sea. In Ugaritic literature, the god Baal wields rods of Amar to fight off Yam and Nahar. These are destructive gods, nature deified, against whom Adonai does battle. Or it could be that in the time of Habakkuk, the words had lost their original meaning and were simply terms for nature acting badly. Or maybe the psalmist was telling how Adonai must battle evil gods and their mishlachat malachei ra'im, their cohort of evil messengers. We who are lechume reshef, those embattled of reshef, the plague, that's us. We tremble before the terrible force of nature that has killed hundreds of thousands or more who shelter in our homes. We daven on Zoom. We weep for the millions who have lost everything. The bounty we celebrate lives side by side with invisible viruses that sicken and kill us, close our schools and camps and campuses and businesses, drive tens of millions of people from their livelihood, leave 20% of our kids hungry, keep us from family, friends, and the shul we love. We live in a very imperfect world. The God who bids us rejoice in the Torah goes out against plague and earthquake and flood and famine, and so do we. There are 2 ways, I think, to respond to this strange world that we live in. One is to sit back and pray for the Messiah. It'll happen like magic. The Messiah will come, and all we need to do is wait for God's great salvation. Or it was taught in a Braita with regard to the appreciation of life. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, King Solomon also said in wisdom, and remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years arrive when you will say, I have no desire for them. And Rabbi Shimon explains what Kohelet meant. And the years arrive when you will say, I have no desire for them. Ein li b'hem chefetz. When is this time that you will say, I have no desire for them? These, said Rabbi Shimon, are the days of the Messiah, in which there is neither merit nor liability. Elu yemot HaMashiach, she'en behem lo zchut v'lo chova, כי בימי משיח לא יהיה באדם חפץ, אבל יעשה בטבעו המעשה הראוי. ולפיכך אין בהם לא זכות ולא חובה, כי הזכות והחובה תלויים בחפץ. Because in the days of the Messiah, no one will desire anything, and everyone will, by nature, do what's right. Thus, there will be no merit and no blame, because without desire, without need, we are called upon to do nothing. And there is no merit, and there is no blame. We live in a time when we are commanded to rejoice for God's blessing, and yet, like God, we are battling the cruelest elements of nature. But that too is a blessing, in that it enables us to see the needs and desires of those around us, to battle with God, the devastation of the plague, and with Torah as our guide, to do for each other, and to know that by doing so, we have transcended the finitude of the pandemic and found moments of eternity in our daily lives. ויפתח ליבנו בתורתו, וישם ליבנו אהבתו ויראתו, לעשות רצונו. May God open our hearts with Torah and put into our heart love and fear in order to do God's will. Shabbat Shalom and Moedim L'Simcha.